hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mehta and Mark, and happy Blasphemy Rights Day, everybody. So I actually, let me start off by telling you a story that has to do with selling my soul on eBay, which went for like $500, which was donated to the SSA. So years ago, I quote unquote sold my soul, and I had a chance to write a book about, it was for a Christian publisher, about how I, as an atheist, visited a whole bunch of Christian churches, and having never been to a Christian church, it was very eye-opening and a learning experience, and I encourage you to do it if you've never done it before, because it's amazing what happens in some of these places, especially like the mega churches. But I wrote this book about going to church, and it was for Christians, and one of the consequences of that is after the book came out, I got invited to speak at a few Christian schools. Yeah, they know I'm an atheist. And one of the emails that I got came from a student who said, you know, can you please come every year? My school likes to bring in people whose personal views are very different from that of the student body. They thought that was a really interesting thing to do, so he said, you know, a couple years ago they brought in a feminist. A couple of years. A year after that, they brought in a Democrat. And they were like, hey, we think it'd be interesting. We brought in an atheist to talk to the Christian population here. And they actually, the guy who wrote me said, you know, this is I'm actually president of the Honors College. That's why I'm the one inviting you. And then P.S., I'm an atheist too. Don't tell anyone. This is a big deal because he could get expelled because you have to sign those faith statements at schools like this. And the reason he felt comfortable telling me this is he knew it was safe with me. But he said, when I talked to him more, only a couple people knew he was an atheist. There were a couple students at the school, very close, trusted friends. They weren't going to rat him out. And I think one professor. And that was it. No one else knew he was an atheist. But when I got to meet him, I gave this talk. I gave a talk about the book, and it was a very different experience talking to a crowd of Christians about, hey, here's why I don't like your church. And then after it was done, I got to hang out with this guy and his friends, and one of his friends happened to also be a teacher like me, so we had that in common, so we bonded. But she taught Sunday school. And so I figured, hey, I teach at a public school. I'm sure our jobs are pretty similar, actually, because despite the subject matter, we probably have a lot in common. So we were talking about that sort of thing, and I asked her, you know, how does your curriculum work? What do you teach? Do you make it up as you go along, or do they tell you this is what you have to teach? And she said the church basically says, she teaches like 8-year-olds. The church says this is what you got to teach that age group. Here's the lesson, here's the plan, and but you can do it however you want. And so one day they handed her a bunch of gingerbread men outlines to give to these 8-year-olds, and her job was to have the kids draw what a Christian looked like. That was her reaction too, because she was thinking, you can't do that. You can't draw what a Christian looks like, because Christians don't look alike. I mean, that's silly. There's no one stereotypical Christian. Or even if you think there is, you're wrong. So why are we teaching kids that? And then the church gave her more gingerbread men, and they said, and then have the kids draw what a non-Christian looks like. So she tries to explain, like, this won't end well. So she tries telling the kids, look, you guys, you can't know what someone believes just by looking at them. You got to have a conversation. You got to talk to them. But again, they're 8. How much of this really sinks in? So after all of this conversation, it turned out she had saved a drawing for me from one of the kids. So according to one of her students, after the spiel that she gave, this is what the kid said a Christian looks like. He has a banana in his hand and Ray Comfort would be proud. But look at this kid. Perfectly combed hair, he has freckles. He's saying, I love God. He's holding a cross. His shirt is nicely tucked into his pants. Everything about this person screams perfection and awesomeness and wholesome. Okay, so that's what a Christian looks like. Here's what the same kid drew for non-Christian. Didn't even bother with the hair. Who cares about that? He has piercings on his face everywhere. He's holding a bottle, because that's normal. You can't see what he's saying in the bubble, but it says like, I'm cussing, God isn't real. He has tattoos that are so bad they're sticking out of his body. He ripped off the sleeves of his shirt in anger. His clothes aren't even colored in. I don't know what's up with that. And he has a unibrow. That's just mean. Why would you do that?
And
So,
a cigarette.
after all, I mean, she's trying to explain you can't do this. But this is what the kid draws afterwards. And here's the problem with this. This kid's 8. Where did he learn this from? I don't think it's from his parents. Because I don't think a parent would actually, even Christian ones, even fundamentalist Christian ones, I don't think they're going to sit their kids down and say, this is what a Christian is, this is what a non-Christian is. Maybe in our stereotypical idea of what Christian fundamentalist families are like, but I don't think most parents are doing this. I think they're saying, look, most people are good, but you should be Christian because it'll be better, whatever. And I don't think this kid's pastor is doing it, but over the course of maybe going to church as a kid, over the course of listening to sermons and listening to his parents, this is what he's picking up on. And this is a problem because this kid's 8, he's going to go to school where he's going to meet some atheists in a couple of years. By the time he gets to high school, if this is the stereotype he has in his mind, can you imagine what it would be like? I became an atheist my freshman year of high school, and I can't imagine being friends with someone like this, or this person wanting to be friends with me, because that's what they think I really am like. And that's a problem, because especially in high school, we don't want anyone to get so entrenched in their views that they can't have these conversations, that they can't talk about it. And if this is what the viewpoint is, how can you have discussion? How can you debate these ideas at this age when you're still forming your ideas? And that's a problem. So that happened a while ago. And over the course of the past few years, since that incident happened, I've actually worked a lot more closely with the Secular Student Alliance, which I think it was mentioned yesterday by David Niosi, that it has over 350 campus affiliates nationwide. And that's a big change since like 5 years ago. But I've gotten a chance to talk to and work with a lot of high school students, a lot of college students. And it turns out at a lot of these places, the biggest problem, the biggest challenge all these students have is combating that stereotype. And they do a lot of awesome things to combat it. They will do service projects, volunteer work. How many groups have like adopted a highway or run a blood drive or do charity work? So many. And I know what happens locally too. And this is part of the thing. How many of the billboards have gone up with these innocuous messages like, hey, atheists exist and that's controversial? And it's because everyone's seeing that evil stereotype gingerbread man. So one story in particular that happened about 5 years ago kind of makes this point very clear. And what happened is back in about 2004, a girl named Nicole lived in Oklahoma. She also was an atheist, and she had just moved to a town in Oklahoma with her family. And she's an athletic girl, so she tried out in the fall. She figured, oh, hey, I don't know anybody at the school. I got to make some friends somehow. So she tried out for the football team, and she made it. And apparently she was really good too. And the other kids on the team, they treated her with respect. They treated her like one of her own. And then in the winter time, she's like, all right, I want to do another sport because that was fun. Let me try it for the girls' basketball team. And then she made that. And at the end of the first basketball game, you know, when I did soccer when I was younger, and at the end of a game, win or lose, you would go to midfield, you would shake the hands of your opponents, you'd say good game, and then you run off and celebrate or cry or whatever. We did a lot of crying. Nicole finishes that first game, and instead of doing any of that, her team gathers at center court with the opposing team, and they all hold hands, and they say the Lord's Prayer. That's a little weird at a public school, but Nicole's thinking, I don't want to be a part of this. Part of it's because she's an atheist. Part of it, because this is how amazing of a person she is, part of it is because she thought it would be disrespectful to them if an atheist joined their prayer circle. And so she tells her coach, I'm an atheist, I don't want to do the Lord's Prayer. And he's like, oh, go back in the locker room then. So she goes. And you would think the story just ends there. Like, that's it. No, the coach actually met with the school principal and the superintendent the next day. There's like a collusion. This is all documented stuff. They meet and they decide this is a situation that needs to be dealt with because she's bad. She's a bad student. So they kick her off the team. Here's what, it's even worse, they don't even tell her. The way she finds out is on Tuesday when they have their next game. her name's not on the roster. So she's like, hey coach, why am I not playing? And he's like, because you stole someone's sneakers. She's like, I didn't steal anyone's sneakers. I did borrow some from another student, but then I gave it back to her, and the other teammates saw me, and she even said thank you. And then he's like, well, it's because you're bad for team morale. And she's like, but I come early to practice, and I run laps before everyone else. Like, how is it that? And ultimately, eventually they got out that it's because she wasn't participating in the prayer. But when she got kicked off the team, imagine you're a freshman, you get kicked off the basketball team, that word travels fast. So now all the kids in the school knew that she was kicked off the team, and she was kicked off the team because she was an atheist. And so imagine what that's like at a school in Oklahoma where they're so devout in that area that they do the Lord's prayers after basketball games. She's there, she gets called names, she gets called like a little witch. Some kids found out that she was a Democrat, even though she's like 14 at the time. So they started calling her gay because she would have supported John Kerry in that year's election. There was the principal's son who said, the very sight of you makes me want to grab a gun. When she goes to the bathroom during class, when she leaves the class, the teachers are like, I hate that girl. And this all happened. And her dad, when they asked him, like, what was that like? He's like, I'm sending my daughter to a school where there's like a religious gang. That's what this is like. She's getting bullied nonstop. So here's the question. First of all, let me say this. A year later, after all this had happened, she was still at the school. She's a sophomore. She tries out for the team again. And she made it again because she's good. And at the first game afterwards, they did the Lord's Prayer again, because that hadn't changed. And there's actually a video on YouTube with the prayer circle going on at center court, and then here's Nicole standing off to the side, just standing there as they all say the prayer, and then they say the Pledge of Allegiance. And at the end of doing all that, one of Nicole's teammates walks up to her and puts her arm around Nicole, and they walk off to the locker room. And Nicole said later, yeah, what she told me, she whispered something in my ear when she put her arm around me, and she said, God forgives you, and I forgive you. And then Nicole was kicked off the team again. Yeah, this time she's like, why'd I get kicked off the team? And the coach said, because you threatened to kill somebody. Whoa! Came out of nowhere. At this point, the dad was like, this is absurd, I'm not putting my daughter through this again. He pulled her out, he homeschooled her for the rest of high school. He took her siblings out because they were facing like collateral damage, and he took them out and homeschooled them too. So, the reason I bring this up is this. Now, American Atheists helped them file a civil lawsuit against the district, and ultimately it was settled for an undisclosed amount. The school apologized, whatever. Little good that does to her, right, after all that happened. She tried going back to school for a couple days by the junior year or senior year, and she said she came into that school for like 2 days, and when she was there was a new kid at the school. He was a transfer student, and he's like, oh, I know you, you're that evil little atheist, like the little devil. And then she's like, I'm not doing this again, and she just left. So the reason I bring this up is, so where were all of us when this was happening? Now there were some blog posts written at the time. I know PZ was around at the time, which is more than most people. I know I was around at the time. But seriously, the community as a whole wasn't really there, in the sense that we weren't going to those school board meetings. It was that family and like American Atheists representatives, and that was kind of it. They were on their own. It was a big story that the jury found in her defense, I guess, because they weren't expecting that. So let's flash forward to this past year. If you know the story of Jessica Alquist, I'm not going to say that whole story, but Jessica did a similar thing that you heard yesterday, where there was a prayer banner in her school in Rhode Island. She wanted to get it taken down. The ACLU filed a lawsuit. She was the lead plaintiff, and ultimately she won that case. She went through the same kind of bullying at her school. She went through the same kind of harassment, maybe even multiplied because there was social media involved. But this time, our community seemed to be there. Whenever someone issued a threat to her on Twitter or Facebook, people had screenshots taken, they compiled them, they sent them to the police office in the area. There were a lot of atheists who attended school board meetings where they talked about this stuff. Even though it wasn't easy for her, it definitely wasn't easy for her, she at least had some support. And it was better. And like, imagine if anything like Nicole's situation happened today, think of what would happen. I mean, you would hear about it quickly through our networks. You would be able to do something about it, whether it's help pitch in for her legal defense or something like that. You would hear about it. And more likely than not, you would help out in some way. At least by telling people about it, we would alert the news media and all that stuff. That's a big change from what happened when Nicole was around. So the question is, what happened in the past 5 years that made us so quick to respond to Jessica's situation and so relatively awful to respond when Nicole was around? And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that our movement's growing, and especially the youth movement has gotten so much bigger and better, and we're able to communicate about this stuff at a better pace than ever before. This past summer, I had a chance, I write a blog, friendlyatheist.com, and I wrote a book over the summer about the challenges that high school atheists have to go to. And why is it that no one was there for Nicole, so to speak, and a lot of people were there for Jessica? Because that's a big change, and it sounds like things are getting better, but I don't think they're a lot better. But it is getting there. It's getting to the point where we could talk about this stuff, where being the atheist at your school isn't necessarily like a death sentence. There's Catherine Stewart wrote this fantastic book called The Good News Club. She actually talked about Nicole, and she said for every Nicole, how many thousands of kids are there who would just join the prayer circle and just mumble the words? How much easier would that be? And many students praying are non-theists or members of other religions, but they know that the locker room is no place for dissent, and a refusal to participate could be construed as a sign of a lack of commitment. You have to pray to play. And that is so true. Nicole was courageous for not just following along and stepping in that circle, but she paid the price for not doing it. So this is an issue to talk about. So why is this getting better? Let's talk about what's happened in the past few years. This is a study from the Pew Forum, and they asked people, what's your religious identity? What do you affiliate with? And they lumped together atheists and non-believers and all agnostics, what have you, into a group called unaffiliated, or, the nuns. And this is what's going on. If you're part of the millennial generation, if you're part of the greatest generation or the silent generation, everyone born up through 1945, the amount of people who are unaffiliated is just under 10%. It's a low number. But then you get to the baby boomers, it's a little better, 13%. You talk about Generation X, so this is born 1965 through 1980, and it's 20%. That's amazing. But then you get to the millennials. This is just kids born after 1981. This is my generation and younger. These are the kids I teach. They're at 26% non-religious. That doesn't mean they're atheists, but it means even if they're Christian, they don't identify as a Christian per se, or they don't belong to a certain church. They're just, I'm not one of them. Maybe they're a Jesus follower. That's possible. But we're talking like 1 out of 4 kids is unaffiliated with religion. That's a huge change from a generation ago. That's a huge change from like a decade ago. They didn't even they couldn't, but they didn't even have that result way back when. This is a similar survey. This came out this past summer. They asked, do you ever doubt the existence of God? And if you're a devout religious person, you're going to say, no, I never doubt. So most of these numbers are pretty close to 100% because no one doubts their faith. So again, this is the greatest generation, the silent generation, the boomers, Generation X. These numbers are still kind of high, but what made news is what's happening to the millennial generation, which is that number's falling really sharply at the end there. And those last 2 dots, if you could see this, from 2007 to 2012, that number dropped to 64% at the end there, meaning that a lot of people are now doubting their faith. Maybe they go back to it, but they're doubting it. And that's a win for us when they're doubting their faith. So this is happening. This generational change is happening. It's becoming more acceptable to be an atheist. You're not going to be the outcast as you once were. This is the Secular Student Alliance. This is the number of groups we've had over the past few years. This is starting in 2003, going all the way to 2012, every year. And believe me, the Secular Student Alliance does a very strict job of monitoring their groups. If we can't vouch that they exist, they go off the list. So these are groups we can vouch for. It started when I got involved with the SSA back in like 2003, 2004. We had under 50 groups. And it's at the point now where we're at like 360. And since a couple minutes have passed, it's probably more now, you know? It's growing fast. But okay, that growth is kind of awesome. But here's what's even more interesting. This is the number of high school groups we had. In 2007, I think there were about 2. 2 high school groups across the country. And this is what happened. 2010, 2011, at most we're at like 12. I mean, there just aren't high school groups. And by the way, I want to point this out. In the 1980s, they passed something called the Equal Access Act, which basically says if your school has after-school clubs of any sort that are non-curricular, so like a chess team or a drama club, you can have an atheist club. They cannot legally stop you from doing it. That law is still in effect. But no one knows about it. How many kids know that happens? How many kids who are atheists know that you could start an atheist group? At least we're at the point where if you're a gay high school student, you might have heard about the Gay Straight Alliance or something like that. But atheist students don't tend to know that you could start groups. But now we're making them aware of it. And we've done a really good job of making them aware of, if you're an atheist, one of the best things you could do is be out if you don't think it's gonna, ostracize you. And then let's talk about this stuff. And here's what's happened. I don't have the number for fall of 2011, but check out what's happened in the past year. Oh, that's 46. And that number's growing fast too. So this is a subset of the chart I was showing you earlier, but that is huge growth. And that's just high school. And the only reason I think it's gotten better, one is the Secular Student Alliance actually hires a position to focus on high school students. And they're putting resources into high schools that we never even thought about before because we were so busy focusing on the college level. Now we realize, hey, look, college is great. We know how to do college. Let's expand out to high school because there's no reason we shouldn't be doing that as well. And as more students talk to each other and they talk to their friends at other schools, these groups are forming. And what does this do? It means that if there is an issue, like Nicole's or Jessica, there's a built-in support system at this school. It means you have religious discussions. It does not mean you're just sitting around blasting your fellow students. In fact, I would argue that that's counterproductive at a high school. What you want to do at a high school setting is you want to have these discussions. You want to teach people about what religion says and what it doesn't say, what the stereotypes are. You want to spread to your fellow classmates, look, this is what you think an atheist is. Let me tell you what it really is. And believe it or not, there's a lot of community service being done in these groups. Actually, at my high school, we don't have a Secular Student Alliance. I sure as hell am not starting one. It's not my place to do it. But I did have a student a year ago who came up to me and said she was interested in starting one. And I said, okay, one, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole because I don't want it to sound like it's my club or something. But I am really curious, what do you want to do if you start this club? And she said, I want to do a lot of community service. I want to teach people that atheists aren't bad people. That was like the end of her list. It's like, oh my God, that's amazing. Now, the student had a lot of other stuff going on, so the club never got off the ground. But I don't think her attitude is very different from that of a lot of high school students. You're not in this to convert everyone to atheism. You're in this at the high school level to teach people and to have these interesting discussions because you don't really get those type of conversations in the classroom. This is something we've also done a really nice job of every time there's an issue at the high school level. And like I said, these clubs are completely legal, but administrators don't know that. In fact, if you ask the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they say like one of the biggest challenges, they have a list of challenges at the high school level, and one of the biggest ones is administrators saying you can't have a group. And it's totally illegal, and they can't do that. So now the Secular Student Alliance has gotten really good at countering this. Now, if you're the Freedom from Religion Foundation, you might send a letter of complaint. You might have to file a lawsuit if it comes down to that, but you want to avoid that at all possible because it costs money. But what we've done that's really good is we've started alerting the media to these stories. And sometimes the story isn't that the administration is blocking these groups. The story is that these groups exist. There are high school atheists. Oh my God. What makes for a good story? You want conflict. There is no better conflict than an atheist in a high school. Yeah. And so this is a story that appeared in the New York Times. This is a school in Rutherford. This is Rutherford High School in Florida. And the entire article is just about how this atheist group exists. That's the story. There's no conflict. They were like, hey, look, they have a faculty sponsor. He's kind of awesome. Look at what these kids are talking about. Look at what they're doing. There's no other story than that. But there were two lines that really stuck out to me, and they were at the end of the article. And this first one, there are students who do not want their parents to know they belong to an atheist club. I tell my mother I'm an ocean club. So here's a girl who has to lie to her parents about where she is after school so she can attend this group's meetings. And then the other one that was probably more heartbreaking, a girl whose father was in the Navy would be angry if he found out she was an atheist. So she asked that her name not be used for fear it would hurt her father. I don't want us to grow apart over this. I know. And so this is a very sympathetic portrayal of this group and the students in it. But again, imagine this story going out across the nation on the internet where it says, look, here are these kids doing something awesome. They're discussing religion. They're talking about these things. They are not bad kids. And if you read the article, you get that sense. These are really strong students. Their faculty sponsor is not trying to indoctrinate them into anything. His function is as a moderator more than anything else. And yet, there are still kids who can't tell their parents about this because their parents are thinking that their kids are immoral, evil, wicked little kids. I actually talked, after this article came out, I spoke to the faculty sponsor of this group. And I asked him, how do you get away with this at a school? Because I imagine there's a lot of pushback and everything. And he told me a couple stories, and one of them that was most interesting is he said, he's been teaching at the school for 30 years. So it's not like he's in danger of getting fired or anything like that over something like this. So that helps. But he said what was interesting is he taught a philosophy class where they discussed things like the students' religious views, and they had those conversations. And afterwards, some kids would say to him, hey, Mr. Creamer, what do you believe in? Do you go to church? And he would always answer, I don't like to talk about that with my students. I don't think, it's my business to tell you where I go, so I'm not going to say anything. It's a very respectful answer, and I've given that answer in some context or another in the past. And then you hear the same students ask their Christian teachers the same question, where do you go to church? They never said the same thing. They were always like, oh, I go to church here, you should come with me one day. It was always that, and he's listening to this and he's saying, how come I have to hide who I am? And these other teachers are just, here's where I go, why am I hiding this? And he didn't think they were wrong for answering the question. He thought he was wrong for hiding from it. So eventually he said, hey, next time a kid asks me, I'm going to be honest. So the next time a kid said, where do you go to church? He said, I don't go to church, and my wife doesn't go to church. We're both atheists. And it wasn't a big deal. And eventually some kids asked him if he would be their faculty sponsor, and he said yes. And this group has been amazing. When this article came out, they got so much positive feedback from people who read the article. He said they have a bookshelf in his classroom with some atheist books for students who want to read them, but you can't bring it home or anything like that. And he said after this article came out, people sent them books to the point where his entire bookshelf in the classroom is just entirely full. It's awesome. So the media, and again, what's the story here? Why did the New York Times want to write about this? Because the group exists. That's a story, and it's continuing to be a story anywhere these groups form. Here's a similar story. This is a student in Texas, Brian Lisco. He wanted to start a group. His administration kept saying no. The principal said he could have it, but he has to call it Philosophy Club. And you can't join up with the Secular Student Alliance. But again, they're not going to say that to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, like, call yourselves the Tim Tebow Club, but you can't do that. They wouldn't do that to them. But when it's atheists, okay, so what did we do with the Secular Student Alliance? Well, we tried. Actually, the high school specialist emailed the principal saying, hey, you can't do what you're doing, we should talk about this. Did that for days, no response. So finally, we're like, who else would be interested in this story, since he clearly doesn't care about these Secular Student Alliance? Hey, let's tell our friends at USA Today. So the religion writer there emailed the principal for 4 days straight, didn't get a response. Basically saying, hey, why can't you form the club? We're going to write a story on this. I'd love to get some feedback from you. Finally, on the 5th day, the writer got a one-line response back. He can have his club. So after a request for comment from USA Today, the school abruptly granted Lisco the Secular Student Alliance Club. And that group, here's the problem. That student's a senior. When he graduates, it's hard to do in college, it's even harder in high school, to keep that going. There was one story of a student from the 90s, so we're talking over a decade ago, where he wanted to start a group. His principal kept saying, come back in a couple weeks, then we'll talk about it. Oh, come back and see me in a couple weeks. He comes back in a couple weeks, principal's not there. It's like he's actively avoiding him. Like, oh, just come back later. Eventually, it's getting to the point where it's the end of the school year, and this kid's like, I'm gonna graduate in a week. He's just pushing this off until I graduate, and I can't do anything about it. So finally, he took some action, and the school granted him the SSA with about 2 days left of school to spare, and the student tried to get one of his friends, younger friends, to take it over, and eventually he said the student wouldn't take over the group because the controversy had been in the newspapers, and the student's parents didn't want him being involved with a group like that. That happens a lot. So it's really important that we get these groups started, and that way that the younger kids can be a part of it, they know how to take it over, because succession planning is always hard, but it's really hard when these kids are 14, 15, 16. And finally, this is just another story to share. Sometimes these students are willing to speak out, even if they don't know if there's anyone else like them. This is a girl named Crystal, and she lives in Tennessee. And she's honor student on the swim team, editor of the school newspaper. She wrote an opinion piece called, like, No Rights, The Life of an Atheist, basically saying, look at all the Christian privilege that's in this school. Look at there are teachers who, like, have Bible verses on the board and have, Bibles on their desk. There's all this stuff. These are all, like, horrible things. Like, why are we allowing this to happen? She wasn't saying we should file a lawsuit. She was saying, think about what it's like for the atheists in the school when you got to go to these classrooms where your teachers are all really religious. That's really hard for an atheist. So she wrote this article for her school paper, and then her school said, you can't publish this because it would be disruptive or something like that. So they basically blocked her from publishing this article. But the Knoxville News-Sentinel newspaper heard about the story, so they wrote a story about how the school blocked her from publishing this. I believe their faculty sponsor let them know about the story. And not only that, the Knoxville newspaper actually gave her space to publish her column in their paper. So the media loves young atheists. So it's one of the things we tell all of our student groups now. If you are doing anything, if you are doing any charity drive, if you are collecting money for a good cause, if you're holding a debate in your school with a religious group, don't just keep it to yourselves. Tell the SSA, tell your local newspapers what's going on, because odds are they'll be really interested in that kind of a story. And it's good because all of the press that I almost always tend to see about high school atheists, it's positive press. Because these kids are not doing anything wrong, they're not doing anything bad. It's possible that could happen, but for the most part, the groups I've seen, it's all been positive coverage. And it also, so this is some of the stuff I talk about in the book. This is part of the reason things have changed to the point where when Jessica's under attack in her school, we all know about it, we all spread it, we all want to reach out to her, we all want to help her out. One other way that's been really good is just what social media has done. If you're on Facebook, you can look under religious views, and students, even if they're afraid of, like, the dreaded atheist word, they're not so afraid to write down Pastafarian. They're not afraid to say, I'm non-religious or unaffiliated or something, and we encourage students to do that on their profile if they don't think it's going to cause any chaos. But social media has been great because people can share the fact that they're atheist on YouTube and their personal blogs and on places like Facebook or Twitter. So this is just a campaign that happened where we just said, hey, just tell the world you're an atheist. I say we, I don't even know who started this one. But people started a campaign. Just get the word out that you're an atheist. Take a picture of yourself saying you're an atheist, and look, you're not a horrible, you don't have horns growing out of your head. And students submitted some really awesome pictures. Some of these are high school, some of these are college. But they just held up these things that say things like, I'm an atheist, and I speak Spanish, and I volunteer with my community, and I do, this service. Just really cool things. And when people see this, think about what happens when they see this. Like, they warm up to you. You're like, oh, you're not a bad person. You're someone I want to have a conversation with. One of the best things we do at the Secular Student Alliance does is every year in the spring they host a thing called Ask an Atheist, which we encourage all of our affiliated groups. All you got to do is get permission to set up a table. It's easy to do if you're at college. Set up a table somewhere on campus and there's a sign that says Ask an Atheist, all you gotta do is sit back with a sign that lets people know you're there to answer their questions. So hey atheist, how do you get morality if you don't have God? Cool, let me answer that question for you. And you have these nice people standing there. In fact, at one high school, this is in Illinois, not far from where I live, a couple of high school students didn't even have a group. They set up a table in their cafeteria with their principal's permission. It said Ask an Atheist. And again, they didn't go to lunch tables, they just sat there. And if kids had questions, they would answer them. A parent found out about it and complained. And she's like, how dare this school promote atheism? Which is a dumb question, because they're not. But it was so bad she pulled her kids out of school the rest of the day. Which, by the way, made for 2 news stories, both of which, they didn't have to say anything. You read that story and you're like, what is this parent doing? She's kind of crazy. But those kids came off like, oh, we were just there to answer their questions. I don't know what was so offensive about that. They were awesome. And you also, here's the other good thing about this. One of the other things that I talk about that we should encourage students to do is run for a class office in their high schools. Hey, if you have a student council election, run for it. If you don't want to run for it, figure out what friend of yours is running for it and then be their campaign managers and run their campaigns to get them elected. Because Cecil's gonna tell you, I'm sure, like, we need people running for office. Get them started early, get them used to running for it, get them used to in college. We need students to become student body presidents. So that way they're not afraid to run for city council or for, hopefully Congress in the future. So that's kind of the gist of what this book is about. I'm hoping this book will come out in the next month or 2. But it's all about what high school atheists are going through, what the challenges are, what we can do to help them out, and how many, I wish I could tell you the number of stories that I had about these. I've shared with you like 10% of the stories that I talk about. There's so many more, and it's disappointing, but on the upside, it's getting a lot better, because most of the recent stories that I have so much better of a happy ending, and the older stories, they just they happen, there was a lawsuit, this kid was ostracized, and that's the end of it. But that doesn't seem to be happening anymore. So, that's what I want to share with you. I would be happy to take any questions if you have them.
I just want to let you all know that we are running tight on time, so we're going to just take a few questions because we do have to get Hemant and some others to the airport. So I don't want to just say that I'm cutting you off, but we don't want them to miss their flights. So we'll take a few quick questions.
You mentioned a book. What's the title of the book?
There's no title yet. It'll have a title soon, but it'll be on friendlyatheist.com.
Okay.
Yes?
I'm really curious about this because, I got serious down at 17 and I was out of high school before I said, hey,
Yeah.
I'm an atheist. But do you have any insight in what causes, how do these kids get so damn sensible so young? I can remember at 17, so I said, this doesn't make sense. But I was out of high school before I finally said,
I think,
do you have any insight on
yeah,
that?
I think kids in high school, and I was in high school a little more than a decade ago, not that long ago, but the kids today seem so much more in tune with what's going on politically than what my classes ever were. And so when you talk about politics, you talk about, which political party is anti-gay. They know which one it is, and they don't want to be a part of that. You know what I mean? And when you talk to kids about, do you go to church, or what do the churches teach? These kids are very gay-friendly, and so they know that religion is usually against that. They know that gay rights isn't happening because of religion. They hear about these controversies. Some of the ones that I'm talking about, they hear about evolution battles, they hear about contraception battles. Like, these are things they hear about and they know stuff about. Like, not all kids, as much as, it's easy to think, not all of them are totally out of touch with what's going on with politics and current events. And so when you get exposed to that stuff, you're like, what's wrong with all these older people? What problem do they have with atheists, with gay people, with women? And they just want no part of that. And I think when they go out with their friends, these discussions come up. They talk about this stuff when they're with their friends, and they have these serious conversations. And it helps that most of their friends, at least in most public schools, it's not so monolithic that you're one Christian and you're surrounded by Christians. You have Muslims surrounding you, you have Jewish kids surrounding you, you have atheists. And when you're exposed to all of them, It's like, oh, okay, all these people are really cool. They all believe totally different things. And you don't care that you disagree with them, but you talk about it.
That's a big insight. When I was a kid, it was all Christian.
Yeah, and in
That's a
fact,
big insight.
one of the stories I talk about is Ellery Shemp, who helped get prayer out of public schools. And when he talks about it, he was a Christian, raised in a Christian family. I'm sorry, was it Jewish? It was Jewish family growing up and stuff. But they said the prayer in their schools. And he said one day, instead of reading the prayer, bringing in the Bible or something, he wanted to read something different. But he didn't know what else to read, and one of his friends said, "Oh, my dad has this book called the Quran, which no one had heard of because like Islam wasn't a thing in the 50s, in the 60s in America." And so this kid brought in a Quran and started reading from there, and no one knows what the heck he's doing. But that's kind of how he got this impetus to fight the powers that be. But again, in his school, that was the anomaly because most kids were not like that. Most kids were Christian and they were fine with what was going on. Now you have kids who are way more savvy about this stuff. And you also have groups like the SSA and a lot of Christian ones like it who are willing to step in and support them regardless of their views.
I have a question. If a student wants to start a group in a high school and cannot find a teacher willing to be
Be a faculty sponsor?
Yes.
Yeah, so if a kid can't find a faculty sponsor, you cannot stop a group from forming because you can't find a faculty sponsor. It doesn't matter. The school can appoint you one they don't have to agree with your views. The school can appoint you one. If it comes down to it, they can have a parent volunteer. At my high school, I don't think they would let that happen, a parent volunteer, but they would assign someone. You cannot stop a group from forming because a student can't find a faculty sponsor. And what's happened in a lot of cases, the school, like there might be a faculty sponsor, but the administration basically pressures them into not doing it because it would be a bad career move.
One more question.
That's man had his hand up back there.
Can much be done to get the debate clubs considering this subject
On religion?
on atheism?
I guess it depends on the type of debate club you're talking about. I'm sure it would make, like, God's existence would make for an interesting debate at the high school level, whether it's a formal setting or an informal one. My guess is that the debate teams that I'm thinking of are much more about political issues and not controversial issues so much as, you know what I mean? That they're very formal about what they choose. They don't choose something that's designed to make people mad. They want to choose something that has two sides, but that you can argue on either side of. So I think that's a little tougher, especially coming from above. But I think if students want to have that debate, it's entirely possible to get it going from the ground up. But you need students who are willing to make that happen. So you need students who are saying, hey, I will reach out to the Christian group in my school and see if they will debate me or debate someone from our club on this. And I think that would be a fascinating topic to see two students discussing, God's existence and have that debate. I would love to see that. So I guess that's how you could get that thing happen. If anyone has any more questions, my email is there. Please let